to the Duality Way podcast, where we discuss all things health and wellness related from a professional perspective, understanding the dualistic nature of life.
Today we'll be discussing the silent productivity killer that you're ignoring, being employee burnout. So you and I have both been through burnout ourselves. I know we've also seen our staff members and our team members go through burnout themselves, and we know obviously that it's a real productivity killer, because the minute you have one person that's down, or even just slightly lower in capacity, the whole team gets buggered up. How have you noticed, and what sort of signs have you noticed in some of your team members when it comes to burnout? So when it comes to employee burnout, and just burnout in general, there are a couple of signs to kind of look out for in other people. The first of which is demeanor change, when people are frustrated and irritable, and you say something in a joking manner that normally would be an inside joke between you and that person, and they take offense to it, or they take it seriously, or all of a sudden they're very touchy about the fact that their hair is out of place. So it's very easy sometimes as a person from the outside to see someone in burnout, but from the other side it's very difficult, because we tend to hold ourselves to a very high standard, and typically we're trying to work harder and work through the problem, and that's not always the answer. I often find that finding more efficient ways is the best way forward.
Talking to what you said about how we just kind of work through it. I know that with me specifically, it always comes at a cost. You're sacrificing the later for the now. So you're really trying to get a whole lot done, now, but then you end up having those repercussions. And I think obviously depending on what you're predisposed to will depend on what you have to deal with afterwards. Some people deal with sleeplessness, some people deal with hormonal issues, some people end up with autoimmune issues, obviously with the extreme cases. But I think what's important to note is you've got to kind of assess where you're at. You've got to be like, okay, I am burning the candle at both ends at the moment. How am I feeling right now? And is it really worth it if I keep pushing like this? Or can I just leave some things for tomorrow? Can I leave this for in 2 days' time? Can I take a break right now and just check in with myself, do a bit of self-care, however that looks like to you, and see how it feels afterwards? Because at the end of the day, if you burn out and you're down for 2 weeks, what's the point? Because that's not sustainable in the long run, and you're actually less productive.
I agree. And also, besides that, the ripple effect is that because you're down, let's say for 2 weeks or whatever, everyone around you tries to cover, and then they tend to get burnt out because they're now overworking themselves, and then you just go.
It's a domino effect.
It's the same as when someone gets the flu in the office. One person sneezes, and the next thing everyone's out 3 days after each other. And it's the person sitting next to them, it's the person sitting next to them, and then like that. And
don't go to work sick, guys.
And so you mentioned trying to sort of figure out, can you leave this for tomorrow? But also for me that sounds like prioritization. And I was going to say, I know that's something that you often you'll phone me and say, hey, I just want to reprioritize, see what's the most important right now. So that is something that I have seen you do. And I think one of the best things that I love Agile, and it's great business methodology, and the number one thing that they always say is less is more. If you're able to get the same result with less work, it's even better, because it means not only is it scalable, but it's also something you can replicate over and over and over again with minimal effort. And once you get to we would call it the minimum viable product, you don't necessarily have to get everything done immediately. And I think that's something that a lot of people do, is they tend to become perfectionists after making it working. So instead of just letting it be for a short while, they want to pump all of their resources into that one thing, and then that tends to work against us because we also have other functions. The reality of work, especially in South Africa at the moment, none of us are doing just one job. We all have multiple functions within our business, especially as business owners. We are always, whether you are operations, marketing, and potentially you're doing HR tomorrow because there's no actual real function for it, someone's got to cover it. The next day you're doing finance, the next day you're doing this. So then on top of that, you've still got to get done the other stuff. And the reality is, everything is a crisis until it's planned. And I think so that's another thing for me that I find is very important that I've been implementing now. So everyone always talks about time blocking. Every time they do personal care, they're like, oh, let's do time blocking. And I actually started doing it now with my workflow as well, where I'm scheduling in specific spots of work for specific tasks. So I know on the 25th, I have to get timesheets done so that our interns can get paid on time. So I make sure that on the 25th, between 8 and 10 o'clock, that is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And if I finish early, great. If I don't, oh well. So that for me is something that I've always done. Not always, sorry, it's something I've started doing now because I've realized that I tend to leave things to the last moment because they're not my primary function. But then because of that, it then becomes a ripple effect thereafter.
Yeah. Going back to being a perfectionist and trying to get everything done all at once prior to a launch or all these things. Firstly, I feel attacked. Secondly, I think for me it is something that I struggle with. I am a perfectionist, and it's actually not productive to be a perfectionist because you land up holding everything back and you can slow down the whole process. And nothing is ever perfect. Nothing is ever perfect. No matter how much you work on it, it will never be perfect. And so it's important to know that because it's okay to launch something that isn't perfect. That being said, I think a tool for me that's really helped me is something called an impact effort matrix, which is essentially like you take like a graph, like an x-axis and a y-axis, and one is effort and one is impact. And essentially, you're trying to figure out what is the least amount of effort. What is a task that would be the least amount of effort but the highest impact? And whenever I'm overwhelmed by a lot of tasks, I like to use it because it helps me to simmer down what is my highest priority at the moment. And usually when you take that one thing and you work on that one thing, you'll find that, okay, cool, that's done now, which means I've managed to make a massive impact on this project, and I can now move on to the next least effort, highest impact task. And that for me has really helped. So that prioritizing really helps to prevent that overload burnout that we tend to ignore, and then we spend more time thrashing between tasks instead of actually focusing on one thing at a time. And I think that's a big thing. For me, that's been a bit of a game changer for me because I do tend to get overloaded by several tasks and then I thrash.
And just to speak to that, I think another thing that I've seen myself is the emotional burnout that comes from not meeting your own goals because you've set unrealistic targets can be a real impact factor where you think you're going to get something done in time and you don't, and then it becomes such a frustration because it slows everything down in the meantime. And part of that for me, I've started implementing what's called a burn down chart. So what I do is I assess if I'm planning to do something in 2 weeks, I have a look back at previous tasks that I've done, and I try and find something that is in my mind as similar as possible to this task in terms of effort, and I look at how long it actually took me along with all of the other stuff. Because, and we've spoken about this before, in a vacuum, everything's good.
Yes.
But the reality is you're never in a vacuum.
No.
If you're in an office space, there's always going to be distractions. There's always going to be, even if you're working from home, your fridge might make a noise in the middle of your day. And you're busy, doing doing something, and all of a sudden your entire productivity schedule has just gone out the window. Or if you're like me and you have dogs, one of the dogs comes and like nuzzles their nose in between your thigh and your calf, for instance, I then can't resist that and I want to go and give them some love. And then that then disrupts a full hour of my day, and that goes away. And then all of a sudden I've got a team member phoning me and saying, boss, I need something. And like, so you're never in a vacuum. So the reality is you've got to plan to not be in a vacuum. And I think that that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is they look at a task and they go, okay, this is going to take me this many hours. But instead of looking at it from a factor of how many hours is it going to take me to get to that many hours, they get frustrated because they've now spent 3 hours in their minds doing this thing because they started at 10 o'clock, it's now 1 o'clock.
But they've actually only spent half an hour doing it.
100% because they've been answering an email or a phone call or a WhatsApp, or the child is sick.
Or a customer walks in, or having to deal with some sort of crisis. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that what's interesting about what you're talking about, like I experienced time blindness quite severely. I think it comes with being quite ADHD, but I think that, like you said, you've always got to be cognizant of the fact that there's other things that happen. And so whatever you're estimating it's going to take you, maybe triple it, and because that is the reality usually. Like I was actually saying to you that I ended up working until 2 a.m. last night, which is probably not the best thing to do considering our topic for today, but I just got into a momentum. No one was bothering me. I was working in a vacuum, but that comes at a cost again. It's important to know what you can and you can't do, and know the effect it's going to have on you, and maybe plan if you are going to work in a vacuum and you are going to burn the candle at both ends. Plan your rest afterwards. Because at the end of the day, there are times where you're going to be under pressure, and there are times where maybe you are going to have to, maybe not pull an all-nighter, but work into the night. And if that's the case, cool. Plan when you're going to rest. I knew we were going to shoot today, so I thought, okay, I might be a bit tired, but I know that tomorrow is usually going to be pretty chilled. I'm going to get home after being in the cafe, and I'm going to just watch anime and do nothing. And that's going to be my rest. And I know that, and that's fine.
As you know, I don't ever just do one thing. I am not only running a business, I'm also a student myself. And so when I find works for me something to do, I have structured days with where, and this, I would say straight to you, I'm not available. Done. And that's another point that I want to make is boundary setting. Very often, you spoke about this on Thursday night about the people-pleasing side of things.
Yeah.
Even if it's a client, I can guarantee you now they don't need it today.
Yeah.
You could probably say to them, listen, I don't have time. Sorry, I'm going to get to it next week. They will most likely accept it. They might not be happy, don't get me wrong, because no one is happy if you tell them you're not going to do it in the time frame that they expect you to. But the reality is you've got to look after you. And especially if you're a manager of a team, you also need to look after your team.
Yeah.
Because it's your responsibility to make sure that your team are under realistic expectations. And so I find one of the things that I often have to coach people on is not just boundary setting, but it's about, it's not just your boundary that you've got to set, it's the boundary for your team.
Yeah.
And it's about contracting. So contracting is a very important thing where you agree to do something. Whether it is tangible and it's written down and it's in an agreement, or it's physically the fact that you've stopped your rest and started working, you have agreed to do that thing. And that's another thing that I find is oftentimes we get frustrated because we feel like, I didn't sign up for this, but the reality is if you started doing it, you did. And that for me is something else. So sign up for less things. Because as much as it is going to progress you, if you do it tomorrow, I can guarantee it won't deter from your end goal. It's similar to when we talk about someone who breaks their diet, for instance, because they have a chocolate bar. Every time we do that, we're like completely freak out. We're like, I broke my diet, and in 3 days of just binge eating.
Yeah, because I broke my diet, so I'm just going to binge for 3 days, and it's like, but that doesn't make any sense.
And I find I'm very similar when it comes to work. Like if I'm studying and someone phones me and says they do have something urgent, and I get to doing that thing, it tends to lead to another thing.
Yeah.
Because I notice, I'm like, oh, I still haven't done, and then I do that, and then I go, oh, I still haven't done, and then I do that, and then the next thing I know, I've got 5 hours out of my day that's gone, and now I've got 5 hours less to spend either on rest or on studying. And both of those things are important. That's the reality of life.
Yeah.
You can't only do work. You have to be able to do everything else.
Yeah.
We spoke on Thursday about the equilibrium of life. Because work-life balance is not attainable. It's not ever going to be, I have 50-50 split, because even if you work at 9 to 5,
balance
it's not 50-50, because the other 50% of the time, you're spending 60% of that 50% sleeping.
Yeah.
Sorry guys, like if you are getting 8 hours of sleep, which is very rare these days, it's 60% of your supposed rest time that you're spending sleeping.
Yeah.
You're not actually getting 50% of the time off, because you're just sleeping.
Yeah.
And that's a basic human function. That's not even rest.
I think in conclusion, it's really, it's important to note you've got to be careful of burnout, you've got to look out for the signs. We cannot ignore it. And in fact, if you are pushing and you are working really hard, you've got to plan your rest.
Yeah.
You've got to balance out what you're doing. You've got to know, okay, once I get to this point, I need to shut off. You've got to structure your rest. And I think the more demanding your work is, the more you've got to plan for your rest. And I think that's a good takeaway out of this.
I agree, yeah. And I think on top of that, sticking to the boundaries is also very important. Because as business owners, we know you always want to make more revenue. But the cost of that revenue is not always as vital as we think. Where you've also got to consider what it's going to do to you in the long term. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. That's all the time we have for in this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week we'll be talking about
desk exercise and micro movements, the wellness tool that can revolutionize your workplace.